Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. This lecture we're going to look at identity access management, and in there we're going to create roles. So in the last lecture we configured the AWS command line and we're actually storing our credentials locally on that EC2 instance. And I made the comment, what would happen if that EC2 instance was compromised? What would happen if somebody hacked it and gained access to that EC2 instance? Well, they'd be able to get our credentials. And of course you could use those credentials anywhere. You could store them locally on your PC or laptop and then use those credentials to access somebody's AWS account. So using user credentials is not all that safe. In some places it's necessary, certainly when you're connecting in from outside of the AWS ecosystem, but storing them on EC2 instances is a security risk. And it's also really difficult to manage. What happens if you've got 1,000 EC2 instances and then somebody compromises one and gets the credentials, and then suddenly you have to change those credentials across the other 999 EC2 instances? It can be an administrative burden as well. Well, that's where roles come in. So AWS released roles to try and prevent this. And so in this lab, what we're going to do is we're going to create an EC2 instance and we're going to give it the role so that it can access S3. So it is a lab and you will need to jump into the AWS console. Okay, so I've logged into the AWS console and we just want to scroll down and go into IAM, which is under Security, Identity and Compliance. So click in on there and then we'll go over to roles. Now you may remember in section 3 we created a role called S3-admin-access. And if you haven't actually created that, don't worry, we'll go ahead and just recreate it now. So I'm just going to delete this. So go ahead and hit create new role. Now you can see there's different types of roles. So we've got our AWS service roles. So for every AWS service, there's going to be different roles that you can add to it. Well, not for every single service, but for the services requiring roles. So we're going to be using Amazon EC2. Down here we've got AWS service linked roles. So if we click in that, this is a new, relatively new section which allows Amazon Lex to create and manage both voice bots and just normal bots on your behalf. So don't worry too much about that, it's very new. Here we've got roles for cross-account access. So this basically allows you to access other resources in other AWS accounts that you may or may not have. Then here we have a role for identity provider access. So this is where you can allow users from Cognito or log in with Amazon or Facebook or Google or an OpenID Connect provider to access this AWS account. And a perfect example of that is, let's say you designed an app and this app you release on iOS and Android. And essentially it requires you to sign up using your Facebook credentials in order to access the app. Once you've signed in with your Facebook credentials, you can actually use those same Facebook credentials to grant access to your AWS resources. So maybe you want to allow your users to store data in a DynamoDB table. That is where you would basically go in and configure this. That's more of a developer's topic though. So let's go ahead and click on AWS service role. And then in here, we're going to click on Amazon EC2. And then in here, what we're going to do is we're just going to type in S3 because we want to filter out all our different policies. And we want the S3 full access. So go ahead and click that and click next. And again, I'm just going to call this S3-admin-access. And I'm going to go ahead and create the role. So now that that's created, do note that up here it's global. So whenever you create roles, they're created globally. You can't change a specific region. It doesn't require it. So that can be an important exam topic when they're asking you if you have to create a new role in a new region. The answer is no, because all roles are global. Let's go over here and create an EC2 instance. So I'm going to go ahead and launch an instance. I've already got one running for some reason, so I'm going to go ahead and hit select. And I'm just going to use all the basic default values. The only thing I'm going to change here is my S3-admin-access. So I'm going to create it with this role. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. I'm going to leave everything else as default. I'm going to launch it into my WebDMZ security group, and I'm going to review and launch and just launch. And then I acknowledge that I've got access to that key pair. So that is now launching, and it might just take a couple of minutes. But once it's ready, I'm going to go ahead and log into that EC2 instance. Okay, so my EC2 instance has now been provisioned. Let's go ahead and click on it. Down here, you can see the IAM role assigned to it is S3-admin-access. You can click through that and actually click on the policy, or you could click show policy to just see the JSON policy, or you can actually click here on the policy name and then go ahead and click on S3, and you can see all the actions that you can actually go ahead and perform. Let's go back to the IAM, but let's go back to the EC2 instance. We'll go back to the EC2 dashboard, so click in here. And the other thing I wanted to show you is if we click in here, we can go to Actions, Instance Settings, and we can now attach and replace IAM roles to running EC2 instances. Now this is very, very new. Like, I'm so serious, this has only been a very, very recent change. One of the problems you're going to find with some of the questions in the exam is that Amazon release so much stuff so quickly that it's difficult for the AWS training team to keep the exams completely up to date. So you might see exam questions where it's asking you whether or not it's possible to attach a role to a running EC2 instance. You know, it is now possible. But when the question was written, it might not have been possible. So you just have to bear that in mind, and you'll see it as well with like some of the terminology. So if we're talking about storage gateways, it might be using the old terminology that the product team used to use last year, and now it's completely different if you go and read the documentation. Same with DynamoDB, they'll use old terminology to describe something, and the documentation will call it something else. So it can be a little bit frustrating. You just have to bear that in mind. I mean, I don't blame them. The AWS platform just changes so fast, changes all the time. They're constantly pushing out new updates. So just bear that in mind going into your exam. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go ahead and SSH into my EC2 instance. Okay, so here I am in my terminal window, so I'm just going to type in -SSH EC2 user, and then @ and then my public IP address, and then -I, and then it's my EC2 key pair.pem. Go ahead and hit enter. Going to hit yes, and I'm going to update my privileges, and now I'm going to clear the screen. So I'm logged into my EC2 instance. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to access S3. So let's type in AWS S3 LS, and you can see it just works straight away. So these are all my S3 buckets at the moment inside this particular account. I didn't need to go in and install credentials. I'm able to access S3 immediately, and I'll be able to list you know, the contents of my different S3 buckets. So this is why roles is really, really good, because it's really, really secure. I don't need to store my credentials locally. If my credentials change, I wouldn't need to log into my EC2 instances and update those credentials. And yeah, that's it. That's why roles are so powerful. Now let's just confirm that we have no credentials being saved on this EC2 instance. So let's go ahead and go cd tilde. And so we're going into where we were in the last lecture. If you remember, there was a hidden directory called the .aws directory, but if we try and go into the .aws directory, it doesn't exist. Now, if we actually type in AWS configure in here, we can leave the access key ID, we can leave the secret access key, but we can set our default regions. So you might want to do that. So let's do EU-West-1. Go ahead and hit enter, and the default output format will just make as our, you know, just hit enter. Now, if we actually do cd.aws now, it has created a new directory, and in here it's got our config data, and we can actually go in and have a look at our config data, and it's just defining our region in here. But you can see that there's no stored credentials in here. So if this EC2 instance got terminated, so if this EC2 instance got compromised, we wouldn't have to worry about deleting our access key ID and secret access key, or changing it, and we wouldn't have to worry about updating it across, you know, 1,000 different EC2 instances. So that's why roles are really, really powerful. So that's it for this lecture, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.